Yes, I know this looks like a real mic. It is not. I've fooled you. That wasn't the joke. When I say the words video game, what is it that comes to your mind first? Maybe the image of some kid with a headset on, cursing and yelling as they mash away at the keyboard keys. Okay, maybe not that image exactly, but bring up the topic of video games in any casual conversation, and a lot of people might look at it initially as kind of an immature topic, something self-indulgent and superficial. So, naturally, today I'm going to do everything in my power to completely shatter that narrative. Smash it, obliterate it, punt it into the air like a soccer ball until it's far out of your view, and offer you a new one. That video games are a unique and incredibly diverse medium of art. Now, some of you may already be agreeing with me, even if you do think I'm a little pretentious, which I greatly appreciate. But some others might think that's simply preposterous. For example, there's a pretty popular article by Roger Ebert titled "Video Games Can Never Be Art," where he makes the point, one obvious difference between art and games is that you can win a game. It has rules, points, objectives, and an outcome. Santiago, the person he was debating against, might cite an immersive game without points or rules, but I would say then it ceases to be a game and becomes a representation of a story, a novel, a play, dance, a film. Those are things you cannot win. You can only experience them. Alright, there are a few things to unpack here, but first, I'm going to, reluctantly, give you a definition of what I think art is, just so we can be on the same page. Now, I'm a firm believer that art shouldn't be put in a universally definitive box. It's not only a word, it's an ever-evolving concept that changes based on the culture, the person, the day. Anyone can say something isn't art, and we'd have to just accept that as an opinion, because art isn't something that everyone can reach a consensus on, so trying to pin it down is redundant. However, for the sake of this essay and my film teacher solace, I will, loosely, define art around the concepts of enjoyment, expression, and storytelling. Art was originally created for those who wanted to express themselves, and only grew outwards from there into entertainment and storytelling. Ideally, a piece of art should have all three of these components, but there are cases where we can mix and match. For example, a piece of art with little enjoyment, but with expression and storytelling, might be something created solely to get an idea across and not to be enjoyed. One with little expression might be a super corporate-like mega project that crushes any passion people had while making it, so that it can be the cashiest cow that ever cashed. And one with little storytelling might be something meant more for utility, like interior decoration or web design. These are widely agreed upon forms of art. Whether they're good or bad art is up for debate, on a case-by-case basis. Alright, back to your irregularly scheduled programming. Let's get back to that quote. Okay, so there seems to be an avid motive in this article to define art relative to the works of historical artists such as Michelangelo, Picasso, and Stravinsky. Though I think this very much plays into that kind of elitist notion that the quote-unquote best art has already happened, and that modern art will never be as good. Personally, I don't think the motive when trying to define art should be to resist all the ways that games are like it in favor of how they aren't. Instead, I think games should make us look differently at what we consider art and try to expand our horizons. Just because a Souls game will never be like an Edgar Allan Poe poem doesn't make it any less of an art form. Why would you compare the artistic value of a sculpture to a film? Another point Ebert makes is that the gift of choice in games is something that doesn't occur in other forms of art. That an art piece is defined in the way it is a unified message told to an audience. I I think I'd beg to differ though, as some of the most recognized pieces of art are those that are ambiguous. Ones that don't force messages on you, but simply pose a question of which you have a choice in the answer you come to, and therefore, how you interpret the art. All the good pieces are the most debated ones, the ones the artist might not have even known the answer to, but that implores you to choose what it means on your own. And what about self-inserts and choose-your-own-adventure novels? I doubt you'd be willing to eliminate literature from your definition of art, solely because it can be self-insertive and choice-based like games are. My point is, choice has long been a driving theme of successful art, and now we have the technology to incorporate it in a new and very immersive way, and you want to take that away from us? Shame on you, Roger. Shame. One last thing to note about this quote is the way Mr. Ebert divides games into two categories: those that can be won, and those that are only meant to be experienced. I mean, I think he's onto a little something in that those two types of games are quite different in how they structure themselves, but then he kind of drops the ball when he says that one is art and the other isn't. As we established before, the existence of choice in an art piece doesn't make it inherently not art. Making played games and experienced games into some sort of dichotomy makes it seem like they're fundamentally different instead of something that exemplifies just how diverse video games can be. And while genre can be a fickle term, I think it encapsulates this difference far better than the ultimatum of art or not art does. I just realized how much I like using air quotes. Or should I say, air quotes. Regardless of whether or not I've managed to convince you whether video games are art, I'm going to start diving a little deeper past this baseline and explain to you why games are a medium of just as much artistic integrity as things like cinema and music. I'd even venture further to argue that, in some cases, it's the best possible medium for a specific story to be told because it offers a lot of things that no other medium can. More notably, interactivity. Actually, why don't I give you a more specific example? One of the best games I've ever watched or played is The Beginner's Guide, a game relegated to the term walking simulator, which is a weirdly backhanded name for a genre. The main draw of this game is probably its lack of a fourth wall, in which the narrator and writer, Davey Wreden, addresses the player directly as he inserts them into the various works of his proclaimed friend, Coda. The game seems relatively straightforward at first, but throws you for a loop when it suggests that its narrator might not be as reliable as you'd initially assumed. It carefully and measuredly reveals to the player that Davey is exploiting Coda for their artwork, convinced that their unconventional approach to making games is a dark reflection of their psyche. It culminates further in you, the player's, realization that the very act of playing the game means you're participating in a kind of unsolicited form of viewing artwork. Artwork that wasn't created to be viewed. And because of this, you can't be entirely sure of everything you're being told and shown, until you get to Coda's last game. Whoa, lag.
I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did. I poisoned it for you.
Oh my god. The Beginner's Guide exemplifies how video games are able to make profound commentary utilizing the tools of their medium. So let me again go over those three counterpoints of interest I made about Ebert's quote and explore them through the lens of this game, The Beginner's Guide. And yes, I am aware that I am using the number 3 a lot in my arguments. Don't come at me. I like her. She gives me structure. After both watching and playing Beginner's Guide for myself, I think it is, in essence, a commentary on the skewed priorities within the art community. And it does this while in itself being a character study of Davey Wreden. And I mean the narrator, not actual writer-developer Davey Wreden. To generalize this central theme further, it's an exploration of how art must be able to exist outside an audience. Davy Wreden is first presented as friendly and accommodating, showing the player through Coda's games that we passively assume he has permission to show us. The fact that he is also the narrator and is talking to us without a fourth wall helps even more to establish that he's trustworthy. So, when he starts telling us that Coda added lampposts to the end of all of his games, what reason would we have to doubt him? I think that might be intentional.
It's a lamppost. It's going to appear at the end of every single one of his games from here on out. I think that up to this point, he's been making really strange and abstract games with no clear purpose. He wants a destination, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination.
It initially seems like an unassuming detail. In fact, the common reaction to this is usually, oh, interesting. I wonder what Coda was trying to say when he added those, before moving on to the next game. And it's something that is meant to eventually fall to the back of your mind as Davy talks you through the rest of their games. That is, until you get to this game. Yeah,
I felt good about myself. Finally. For a moment, while I had that, I liked myself.
Stop adding a lamppost. This is the part of the game that gets people, because it says so much with so little. It means Davy is an unreliable narrator, and whether or not he actually changed Coda's games to have lampposts in them, it means he's been forcing their games to have an endpoint, a meaning that simply wasn't meant to be there in the first place. It means Davy is projecting what he thinks art and games should be onto Coda's work. And in the end, it's his fatal flaw. I could go on and on about all the implications this simple setup and payoff has, but in relation to the point I'm trying to make, I'd definitely get carried away. The point is that it serves to deliver a succinct and impactful message both about what kind of person Davy is and about the dangers of amalgamating the artwork and the artist. After you've walked miles and miles through Coda's games, walking once more into these words suddenly makes you completely reevaluate all those miles walked. Makes you question how much of it was authentically Coda's, how much of it was a lie. It literally plops you into this artwork's interactivity, only to force you to thoroughly question it after the fact. And this sort of execution is exactly what makes the medium of Beginner's Guide so important. It's what makes it so essentially a video game. Okay, before we dive into the importance of choice in video games, there are two terms we have to unpack that are fundamental to understanding this topic, and that is interactivity versus gameplay. So let me give you a rundown of my definitions on these terms. So here are some definitions I came up with myself. They come from no official source that I know of, and also I have absolutely no credentials, so feel free to tear them apart at your leisure. Interactivity is the base action necessary from the player in order to progress and experience a game. Gameplay is an extension of interactivity that involves decisions to be made on the player's part, whether tactical or active. You can have interactivity without gameplay, and in some cases the two are conflated, but not gameplay without interactivity. Here, I'll give you an example. In a visual novel game, the interactivity would be the button you press in order to progress the dialogue, and the gameplay would be the choices you have to make. In a game like Kyle is Famous, the interactivity and gameplay are conflated, as the only way to progress in that game at all is to make choices. Get what I'm saying? Now, Beginner's Guide's main vehicle of storytelling is its interactivity. It isn't too interested in alternate endings, just in making sure its sole story is immersive enough to be impactful. That isn't to say it doesn't have gameplay, it does, just minimal, spread out amounts of it. Though, now that I think about it, is the gameplay in Beginner's Guide really gameplay? All it is, it's just doing what the game and Davy tell you to do, finding a switch that solves the puzzle, pressing dialogue options that all do the same thing, and cleaning the same areas of a house over and over again. you're not making a conscious choice, you're just going through the motions, right? Right? Wrong. Although the gameplay can be sparse and requires little to no cognition of your own, it is critical for both the player's experience of the game and their relationship with Davy. The gameplay is meant to follow and enhance the arc of this relationship. When your trust in Davy is initially there, you have no problem filling out these orders he asks from you, and why would you? You're of the thinking that it will progress the game, which obviously is something you want at this point. But as you begin to realize the games he's showing you are not his to share, your reaction, when faced with one of these choices, starts to change. If you want to keep playing the game, you have no choice but to oblige Davy, but I'd argue that doing nothing is a choice, regardless of how long you can keep it up for. The option to do nothing makes the act of doing something that much more emphasized, especially if the player is in conflict about carrying through with said action.
This room actually has a maze in it.
Oh!
Except that all the walls of the maze are invisible, so the experience is really miserable. The game goes beyond not being meant to be played, it actually seems to despise the player for trying to play it at all.
This is...
But I do want to show you the rest of the levels, so when you're ready to continue, press enter and I'll put a bridge over the maze.
The narrator never learned. The game deliberately gives you a choice to press enter, to continue violating Coda's digitized boundaries in order to satisfy Davy's intrusiveness. These choices punctuate the game so well and enhance your understanding of the central conflict in a way that only gameplay is capable of. As the closing point of analysis for this run-on sentence of a video essay, it's important to touch on the rift between more action-oriented games and, well, games like Beginner's Guide. There's a notion out there that action games embody what games are, and that walking simulators are more like honorary games. Hence the very common idea within the gaming community that even if you regularly play these more slow-paced games, you aren't a real gamer. Saying this out loud makes me sound almost bitter. I should clarify that a lot of my favorite games are very action-packed. I love them no less than I do my precious walking sims. But it's exactly for that reason that I think we should stop trying to separate these two and appreciate them more for what they are, which is both art and games simultaneously, to the same degree. Beginner's Guide touches on this topic a little, and one of the most interesting places it does it is in a conversation that allegedly takes place between Davy and Coda.
In Coda's original design, the doors stayed shut for a full hour before letting you go. If you don't mind, I think we're gonna skip that. This is something that he and I used to argue about a lot. You know, whether a game ought to actually be playable. And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't.
Coda touches on something important here, that the way their friend Davy thinks all games should be like is not a metric that they should measure their games against. Night in the Woods, What Remains of Edith Finch, Firewatch, all amazing games with little gameplay but a lot of impact. Doom, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Resident Evil 7, also amazing games that are so different in structure but that I found just as enjoyable. There are, of course, those who will gravitate towards the latter group more and those who will do the same with the former. This doesn't mean either group like games any less than the other, just that they have different things they enjoy in a game. You play video games regularly? Great, you're a gamer. It's as complex as that. No gatekeeping, no prejudice, just respect for the things people value in games they make and play. This respect at the end of Beginner's Guide is exactly the lesson Davy was on the cusp of, but ultimately failed to grasp. In a nutshell, it's sort of wild to me that games can be generally viewed as unartistic simply because a lot of the more popular ones aim primarily to be fun rather than to, critique society or something. Is it not art to piece together all these different mediums of 3D, 2D, music, and so much more in a cohesive and enjoyable way? Many underestimate the care that goes into not only the slow-paced walking sims, but the AAA shooters as well. Frankly, I don't understand how Roger Ebert and others like him came to any other conclusion, especially when games like The Beginner's Guide so eloquently prove that games are just as capable of communicating nuanced ideas as other acclaimed forms of art are. Through the ways that it comments on the art and gaming community, it critiques the need to define art as well as the unnecessary separation of different types of games. And it also emphasizes just how unique and capable video games are in storytelling by using choice as a vehicle to pose thoughtful questions. If you couldn't tell already, video games are really near and dear to me, and I think it's really important that we afford them the integrity that they deserve to be viewed with, artistic or otherwise. So, once again, I thank you for being able to see past my potential pretentiousness to see my point of view, and I thank you for watching.